Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Last Honest Realtor podcast. I'm your host, David Fleming. Thank you so much for joining me today as we find ourselves now in November. I cannot believe it. September and October in the books. And for those of you that are worried I'm going to do a lot more statistics, because I know we've done that, well, quite often this fall. No, we'll shelve that if you are interested, of course, in seeing how the month of October finished up in Toronto. I will be putting together a blog post on the TREB stats. No, today we want to ask and hopefully answer a question. Why is nothing selling this fall? And of course, I don't mean nothing like, well, BlogTO would mean nothing. You know, I always complain that they exacerbate these situations and their headlines are always things, you know, in complete absolutes, like no one is buying real estate and nothing will ever sell again. In fact, I did do a blog not too long ago, and I realize it could come off as kind of tacky, like, you know, Toronto Realty blog going after BlogTO. I never really said anything until like I just hit the boiling point of like the headlines are just so insane. But I'm saying now, why is nothing selling? I don't mean nothing. This year there's going to be probably 58 to 60,000 sales. But relatively speaking, nothing's selling. Now, why is that? I think a lot of us came into the fall market, agents such as myself, industry onlookers, people in other industries too. Talked to a lot of guys in wealth management, a lot of people that work in the financial markets that thought, hey, the fall's going to be a different market. Summer was pretty slow because everyone's enjoying their time off, obviously, but interest rate cuts are on the horizon. The fall will be busy. And, well, it's not. So today we want to figure out why. It's a very difficult market and the sellers are feeling it. And I will get into some of the data with respect to transactions, but talking about why it's a difficult market, I think that is something that not a lot of folks are doing. And again, not to sound tacky here, but there are a lot of voices in and around real estate. And what I'm finding, to be perfectly honest, is that, you know, there may be a lot of folks, whether it's on TikTok or heck, whether it's a podcast, and they're talking about the real estate market, but they're not doing a lot of transactions, right? They're branding themselves the expert, and it's just a lot of fluff. It's a lot of euphemisms. I want to give you an exact situation that happened last week. I'm going to read you an email exchange between myself and my clients while preserving their anonymity and confidentiality, because that is a real life example. That is helpful. That is something that I think that you, if you want to know what's happening in the market, can listen to, latch onto, and understand. So let me do that. I've got a property listed for sale. I'm going to call my clients Jen and Ben. I don't know why. I received this email last week. Hi, David. We noticed that most 3-bedroom homes in our neighborhood are priced around $1.3 million. Why do you think our house is not garnering more interest for showings? We have some observations, but we want to hear what you think. There must be more to it than just a slow market. Totally fair. This is what sellers are thinking right now. There has to be more to it. We continue to tell our clients the market's slow, but a lot of us aren't doing a good enough job to convey to them why it's slow. And I'll read you this email, as I said, because we can talk and talk and talk, and there's an infinite amount of discussion about the market. But what is actually happening behind the scenes? So here's my email verbatim, and I've changed a couple of things, as I said, to preserve anonymity. I said, hi, Jen. In terms of pricing and market activity, I'm happy to chat on the phone if you'd like, as I have a lot to say about this. But then again, I'm a very data-driven person, so maybe I can flush out a few things over email that you can digest. You are not the first seller that has questioned whether the, quote, slow market is responsible for their home not selling. I've also had a lot of clients ask about or mention, quote, list prices in the area, and then many have started to talk about next year. These 3 points all intersect, and to analyze them allows for both current market insights as well as an opportunity to strategize moving forward. Now, I'll read the email, but I'll also provide some context as well. So from the email, for context, our market peaked in 2021 with 122,133 sales. We saw this plummet to 66,315 by 2023, and we moderately improved with 67,984 in 2024. However, we're on pace to set a new low in 2025, and it's not even close. Here's a graphic from my September TREB stats blog, which I then linked in the email. Now, this graphic, which is in the September stats blog, which I can't really show you, well, I suppose I could if you're watching on YouTube, but if you're listening, it won't make any sense. But this graphic essentially shows the monthly breakdown January through December from 2023, 2024, and 2025. And what it shows, January through September. What it shows is that in 2023, there were 54,385 sales. 2024, there were 52,092. And in 2025, there's only 47,886. So what I'm essentially saying to Jen and Ben is, hey, listen, we've got to put the market context out there for you to understand that when we say slow market, we don't just mean slow, we mean all-time slow. I started in this business in 2004. And if I were to go back to, say, 99, 98, the city was half the size. So even if we did see fewer sales back then, I mean, relatively speaking, we're still literally at an all-time low. Back to my email. By my math, we're on pace to see between 58,000 and 62,000 sales in 2025. This would set a record low and by a long shot. Sub 60,000 sales is something I never could have imagined. At the same time, active listings have never been higher. Once upon a time, 20,000 active listings in a single month was considered a lot. Consider that from May of 2019 through April of 2024, we did not see one single month with 20,000 plus active listings. Then in 2024, we saw 20,000 plus active listings 7 times from May through November. In 2025, this continued, except we began to see 30,000 plus active listings, which was unfathomable. In 2025, we've obliterated the previous records for active listings in a month. Then I put in a graphic, which again was from my September stats blog, which is titled Active Listings Top 10 Single Months of All Time. I'm a stats nerd. I do this whether it's with baseball statistics or anything I can get my hands on. I like making charts. I like records. And unfortunately, the record for most active listings in a single month was June of 2025 with 31,603. Second place is May of 2025. Third place is July of 2025. Fourth place is September of 2025. Fifth place is August of 2025. And sixth place is April of 2025. To round out the top 10, you have 4 months from 2008. 2008, slow market, financial crisis in the United States. History will show Canada was not hit. I would say not hit as bad, but I would say, yeah, we were relatively unscathed. But the top 6 months of all time in terms of active listings were in the year 2025. And this was only through 9 months. By the end of the year, we could completely dominate this chart. Back to the email. The combination of record low sales and record high listings have made listing price absolutely irrelevant in this market. The only thing that matters is sold price. And there aren't a ton of sales to go on. It's like looking at the list price of Jays tickets on StubHub today versus what they're going to transact for at 7:59 p.m. on a Friday evening. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I'm not ready to talk about the Jays. And for reference, if you want to talk about the Jays with somebody, you need to ask them first, are you ready to talk about it? So yes, I used the example in my email with Jen and Ben about list prices on StubHub. You could use any example, but to get them to understand that in a market where people are so detached from reality, people are testing the market, you have agents, which I'll explain later, have no experience or no backbone to speak to educate the clients that are selling about what market price is, the list price has never been more relevant. Now back to the email. For context, there have been 692 freehold properties listed in your neighborhood in 2025. There have only been 144 sales. That's an absorption rate of 20.8%, which is exceptionally low. Anything under 50% theoretically signals a buyer's market, but 20.8% is really, really low. 2025 has been a year of very low absorption rates throughout the GTA, but this 20.8% is well below the average in our overall market. Then I put in another chart. Yes, this is a very lengthy email to my client that has a lot of data and a lot of charts, but they really need to understand this. And I'm hoping that you watching or listening will as well. This is the sales to new listings ratio for every month in 2025, January through September. This is in the GTA. And the ratios, some numbers coming at you, are as follows: 31%, 33.5, 29, 29.7, 28.6, 31.5, 34.6, 37.1, and then 29%. But as I mentioned, Jen and Ben's area, the absorption rate is 20.8%. So I said to them, back to the email, again, for context, here's a graph of the last 5 years where I showed exactly that. So let's review. I've explained to Jen and Ben what's happening with sales. I've explained to Jen and Ben what's happening with active listings. I've explained to Jen and Ben what is happening with the absorption rate in their neighborhood. And now let's go to active listings specifically in their neighborhood. Back to our email. There are 133 properties currently listed for sale in your area. 99 are priced above $1.1 million. 56 are priced between $1.1 million and $1.4 million, which is effectively our competition. This is a very different market from what we're accustomed to. In previous market cycles, buyers had few options. You might expect to see maybe 8 to 10 houses for sale in that price bracket instead of 56. Now, for context, I have worked with Jen and Ben for, oh gosh, I should have looked this up, maybe 15, 16 years. When I met them, they owned a small condo. We sold that, we put them in another property. We sold that, we put them in this house. When they sold their 2 condos, we had multiple offers. That was the market. That's what they're accustomed to. But now we're in a market where, as I said, you might expect to see 8 to 10 houses for sale in their area, which was still a lot. There are 56, and that's between 1.1 and 1.4 million where their home is located. Back to the email. That's just blank, which is their area. As I've noted before in conversations, buyers in this area are looking throughout Milton, Georgetown, Mississauga. One person even told me that he's been driving across the GTA showing Scarborough and Mississauga, Scarborough and Mississauga. All this is to say to Jen and Ben that, as an example, and I always go back to where I'm located, right here on 103 Vanderhoof in Leaside, the buyer that's looking in Leaside, 9.5 times out of 10 is only looking in Leaside. The buyer that's looking where Jen and Ben's house is looking everywhere. That further complicates the situation because, as I have mentioned, sales are low, listings are high, absorption rate is low, inventory and competition in their area is extremely high. But it's one thing to have 56 listings in their area, in their price point to compete with. It's another thing entirely to know that they're competing with other cities. Back to the email. In terms of what has sold in September and October in your area, I would offer these. Now, the first property sold on September 3rd for $1,320,000. This is a 4-bed, 3-bath with a finished basement. The next property sold on September 16th for $1,290,000. This is a 3-bed, 4-bath with a finished basement. Another property sold on September 16th for $1,320,000. This is a 4-bed, 3-bath with a finished basement. And I said, again, don't be influenced by list price. Anybody can list for anything, but what are properties selling for? The question we need to ask from a value standpoint is, what does a finished basement cost? Because Jen and Ben do not have a finished basement. So I've given you those prices, $1,320,000, $1,290,000, and $1,320,000 once again. So I've said, what does it cost today to finish? And what does it add on a comparable market analysis? I would say $75,000 if I was working as the listing agent for your home. But I would say $150,000 if I were working as a buyer agent. Now, of course, that is because we want to negotiate. As a buyer agent, you would say, it's going to cost me $150,000 to finish that basement. So let's take $150,000 off of these comps and adjust for other variables. But if I was working for Jen and Ben, which I am, and anybody asked me that question, I would say, you're being crazy. $150,000 is highway robbery. I've got a guy that can do it for $75,000. So then I continue in this email and I said, now in terms of market trajectory, here's where I'm losing a lot of people. I can't predict what the market's going to do, but I can say unequivocally in your specific neighborhood, we are in, at best, a flat market, and at worst, a declining market. And this isn't across the GTA. And I'm going to show you, oh my goodness, you won't believe what's happening across Canada. But what I've said is in their particular area. Now back to the email. It's just so hard to rationalize given all we've ever known as an increasing market. It was literally 2 decades. Now we're coming off this 2022 peak and the market continues to decline. Every seller out there and every agent too are hoping the market gets better next cycle. We heard this in 2023. We heard this in 2024. Now having worked with spring sellers, some of whom have said, I'll wait until the fall when the market will be better, we are starting to hear some people say that they want to wait until the spring of 2026. I hope to God the market is better. I really do. But I honestly could flip a coin and it would be 50-50, as most coins are. We did that in grade 9 in rich math with Mr. DePisa. He made us flip pennies hundreds and hundreds of times. And then we added it all up and guess what? It was 50-50. Yeah. I don't really know that that was necessary, but when you're in enriched math, I guess you got to do something cool. So back to the email. Thank you, David, for that brief interlude. I said this. What I do know is that in your specific area, the market seems to be declining. The statistics show us this. Then I put together a gigantic, and I'm going to show you this one if you're watching. Okay, this is the HPI from 2022 to 2025. That is the home price index. That is Treb's home price index. And I put two columns in here. One is month over month, and one is the change from the September of 2025 data, which is the most recent data, compared to every other month. And it's a lot of red. And what it is showing is that in terms of the home price index, and that's not the market average, the home price index takes out volatility and seasonality. Now, if you are looking to sell your house in May of 2025, you don't want the home price index because it takes out volatility and seasonality. You want to know what's happening right then and there. But what I've always felt is that the home price index, if we're ever going to try to predict the future, probably gives us a better indicator. Because when you're removing seasonality and you're removing volatility, and it is a bit of a lagging indicator, it's a better predictor. So I have said the HPI continues to decline, and this chart gets us up to date. While this isn't a measure of average home sale price, it is a far better measure of market trajectory than anything else. Jen, Ben, I do not want to paint a gloomy picture, but I would be remiss if I didn't paint an accurate one. I will never pressure you guys to sell your house for any amount of money. If you decide this isn't the right time and you want to put this move on hold for 3 to 4 years, I will go down that road with you happily at that time. But the reason we're not getting showings is because sales are at an all-time low, listings are at an all-time high, prices in your area look to still be in decline or balanced at absolute best. The absorption rate in your area is lower than anything I have ever seen, and our home is still overpriced relative to the most recent sales in the area, of which there are very few, but all of which have that finished basement. Please take some time to digest all this and let me know if you want to chat tonight. Every seller is having a hard time processing this market, and it has implications for our lives, our families, and our futures. I'm available for a call at your convenience. David. So that is an email, verbatim, word for word, except changing their names to Jen and Ben, which now I realize Jen Garner and Ben Affleck, was that a thing? Benifer? Or was that J-Lo? Did he date two Jens? So not important, but Jen and Ben, I don't know why. I was like, pick the two most boring names. It could have been Adam and Eve. But that is Jen and Ben. That is a real email exchange between myself and my seller clients, which I would hope at this point really highlights to you what we're discussing in this market. Why is, quote unquote, nothing selling? Everyone's talking about it and everyone's throwing out ideas, but here's a real email. These are real people. Those are real numbers. That's a real area. And I think you can deduce that that's somewhere in the 905. And that is a real example of what is happening. Now, how did this continue? Jen and Ben read the email. They said, okay, we understand. And then we had a very candid conversation. And I said, guys, listen, go back to the beginning. They asked me, what should we do? I said, go back to the beginning, the very, very beginning. Why do you want to move? And they gave me their reasons, which I will keep private. And I said, could you do this in 5 years? And they said, absolutely not. I said, do you want to move now? They said, we want to move yesterday. And I said, well, then we have to adjust our price. And they said, okay. So we adjusted our price, and guess what? We've had 2 offers. Yeah. Now, the first one was decent, and unfortunately, it didn't materialize. It was on Halloween. That was the craziest part. I was out there. My kids were sick. It was kind of raining. And I'm like voice dictating. I'm like, can you move up the closing date? Yeah, go ahead, guys. Just knock on the door. And then I was like, can you please tighten the conditions a little bit? Just say thank you. Say thank you for the candy. Yeah, that's the life of a realtor. No one really feels bad for me. So that one fell through. And then last night, we got just a ridiculous lowball. But listen, we've had 2 offers and we've had 8 showings. And we did an open house. And where we had open houses, I think in early September when we were at a much higher price, it was crickets. This time we were absolutely slammed. So it goes to show you that if you break it down point by point, and in that email, not to repeat myself, but we talked about sales, talked about listings, talked about absorption rate, talked about comps, talked about market trajectory. If you run through all that, you can say, okay, I understand where we are, and now let's adjust and let's adapt. So they understood, they reduced, we're moving, we're probably going to sell this thing. But there's a lot in the market that sellers still aren't understanding. And I mentioned another blog post that I wrote. This was about a week ago. I thought it would be interesting to look at prices across Canada, because this is really going to put things in context for those of us that are Toronto focused or GTA. And going back to the home price index once again, and this is something that Canadian Real Estate Association, CREA, if you go to their website, you can download the whole thing in Excel. It's a lot of fun for nerds like me because I get to format it however I want. And I decided, hey, you know what? I want to know what things have done year over year. So I took September of 2024 and I took September of 2025. I formatted it all. And what CREA does is they do by province and they do by towns and cities for selected data sets. Now, they do not have Manitoba, Yukon, Northwest Territory, or none of it. There's a pun in there somewhere. I will have none of it. But the data is fascinating because all we've heard is how bad the real estate market is, how bad the economy is. Would you believe that Newfoundland and Labrador's HPI year over year is up 10.3%? Would you believe that Quebec's is up 8.1%? Saskatchewan, 7.1%. New Brunswick, 5.8%. Nova Scotia, 4.6%. And PEI is up 0.9%. Alberta's down 0.4%. British Columbia is down 2.7%. And Ontario's HPI is down 6.7% September to September. This is the conversation a lot of agents aren't having with their clients. And I'll go back to a point that I made on the phone last week where I said to a client who I was speaking to about a price reduction for a house that we had priced in May, which is now in the market in October. And the market in that area, unfortunately, has moved down. And I said, I will blame myself on this. I have not done a good enough job explaining to you. The market has declined, but the market is declining. There's a difference between past tense and present tense. And what I mean by that is that let's say that 70% of sellers out there understand the market has declined. There are sellers that are completely lost, on drugs, proverbially, maybe literally to cope. But there are people that are pricing their $1 million house that was 1.4 at the peak at, 1.379. You're out in Durham region or something, you're seeing a lot of that. It makes absolutely no sense. But most people are like, yes, the market has declined. I understand that. Hopefully if you bought it in 1996, yeah, you don't need 2022's peak. But what we're not explaining to those very same people is that the market in many areas is declining. And I mentioned the example of, Leaside. Okay, well, I don't know that market is declining. There are some areas where the market is increasing in the GTA. But we're not telling our clients that if we had a discussion in Jan, Feb about selling, and then you got your house ready in March, April, and then you decided to try it in May, and then it languished through June, July, and August, and then you relisted in September and October, statistically, it's not worth in December what it was when we started this process in Jan and Feb. Agents are not explaining this to their clients, and a lot of the sellers don't want to hear it, and then they fall into the trap of, I'll do it next year. So continuing through this example, I want to show you some absolutely crazy things. I mentioned by province what is happening, but let's go by city. Saskatoon is up 7.4% year over year. Winnipeg is up 5.2%. Regina 5.1%. Edmonton's up 4.4%. And lowly Calgary is down 2.4%. I mentioned Atlantic Canada. Prices in St. John's are up 10.4%. Fredericton, 9.3%. Greater Moncton is up 6.4%. Greater Moncton, as opposed to just Moncton. St. John, I had to put New Brunswick in brackets because if you know the difference between St. John and St. John's, you're definitely Canadian. 6.0%. St. John is up year over year. And Halifax, Dartmouth is up 3.9%. Now, this is wild, okay? Grab onto your hat, folks. Quebec CMA up 17.4% year over year. Estrie CMA, I don't know why I said it like that. I sound like an idiot. Up 13.1%. Mauricie, I don't know what that is. I don't know why I said it like that. Mauricie, Isabella's laughing off camera. Maybe she speaks French. Is up 12.4%. Centre du Québec. I was just having a flashback. My dad put me in senior kindergarten. He put me in French immersion. He was a bit of an elitist. I lasted just that year. Centre du Québec up 11.1%. And then Montreal up 6.5% across the board. That was kind of funny. That was my pen. So everything in Quebec is up. And then If you're watching, this is Ontario. Ontario. So there are 23 areas that create tracks. Ask me how many of the 23 are up year over year. Consider everything in Quebec is up, everything in Atlantic Canada is up, everything in the prairies is up, minus Calgary. Of the 23 areas, how many of them are up year over year? 6. 17 of these areas are down. Now, up 8.4% year over year, Bancrofton area. Sault Ste. Marie, spelled Sault Ste. Marie, never figured that one out, is up 4.6%. Sudbury is up 4.5%. Rideau St. Lawrence is up 3.8%. North Bay is up 3.7%. And Ottawa is up 1.1%. Everything else is down year over year. Now, again, consider this is the home price index. It is not average home price. But what it is a measure of the market. And so if you want to know what has happened in your area, generally speaking, overall, without any seasonality or any volatility, you can look and say, wow, Hamilton Burlington is down 9.4% year over year. Mississauga is down 8.9%. Oakville Milton's down 6.8%. Just naming areas that are closer to the GTA. Greater Toronto's down 5.5%. So the point here, guys, is that as I mentioned, why are more deals not being consummated, let's say, as opposed to the why is nothing selling this fall, is because sellers are ignoring this data. Or, more to the point, listing agents aren't having that conversation with them. So let me propose the following, guys. There are 4 parties to a transaction. There are buyers, sellers, buyer agents, and seller agents. All 4 parties need to be in lockstep to get a deal consummated. And all 4 parties, directly or indirectly, are getting in their own way. Now, these 4 parties, of the 4, I would say the most egregious is the seller and the seller agent. Now, the sellers are guilty of greed and wanting too much money. They are guilty of ignorance, whether deliberate or otherwise. They are guilty of ego. They are guilty of being irrational, making assumptions, or having expectations. So from that list, and if those were offensive words, they're not meant to be anything other than brutally honest. When I say being irrational, ignorant, and I said ignorant, deliberate or otherwise. So let's say that I put this data in front of a protective Freudian slip, in front of a prospective seller. There are some sellers that fold their arms like this and they go, I don't need to know. That doesn't matter. I've sat in living rooms with folks and I've had these conversations and you see them go like this and they go, I'm not interested. I don't need, it's denial, right? And to go back to the Blue Jays, are you ready to talk about the Blue Jays? Okay. The first stage of grief is acceptance. That happened. That happened and just, yeah, okay. And now let's move forward. Silly example, but yeah, it really, really hurt. I mean, gosh, we're 2 outs away. Just like a slider on the inside part of the plate to a guy that hit 7 home runs all year. It happened. As soon as it hit the bat, I said to my wife, gone. I didn't even watch. I ran to the front door and I banged my head against the glass. Did you not want to talk about it? So it's acceptance, guys, and we're obviously accepting what happened. But many sellers aren't accepting it. They're just in denial. And that's what I mean by the ignorance. Now, the greed part, wanting too much money, we all want as much money as possible. And no, you don't have to sell your home. Your home's worth $1 million. You've priced it 1.3. Someone could offer you 1.1. You don't have to take it. When you combine this ignorance and this ego and this being irrational, these assumptions, these expectations, it's going to set you up right off the hop for failure. Now, seller agents are guilty of ego, first and foremost. Listen, as an experienced agent, 21 years in the business, I can tell you I have done things and said things so far this year to get deals done that I never would have done before and never have done, and things that made me uncomfortable. Check your ego at the door. Not being collegial, not extending the olive branch to other agents. You're a listing agent. Someone brings you an offer. It doesn't matter what it is. Don't yell at them. Don't bark at them. What is the upside to that? Now, in a different market, you can do that. Someone brings you an offer, you can flex on them. Listen, I don't need this. I'm going to sell it. I've got 30 showings this week. The only question is how much overlist. You can't do that in this market. You can't do it. You have to extend the olive branch. You have to be collegial. You have to call them. You have to talk to them. Make some small talk. Ask them about the market. Talk to them about their kids. We stress this all the time in my podcast and on Toronto Realty blog. Be collegial. Inexperience, not understanding the market. There is so much inexperience out there. You combine that with greed and stupidity and ego. Not standing up to the seller. And here's what I mean. Someone calls you into their house. They say, I'm interviewing you and 3 other agents. And you go through a listing presentation. Your house is worth $1 million. They say, we are going to list with $1.2 million. Do you want that listing? A lot of agents will take it, either because they think if I have this for 6 to 8 months, eventually I can wear them down and I'll sell it, or they'll take that listing because they just hope maybe that the market will give them a lottery winner. As a listing agent, your job is to educate and inform. And someone has $1 million house, says they want to list at 1.3, or they ignore the data, or they start to give you all sorts of reasons. And I've heard it all. Well, the thing about my property, whenever someone starts with the thing about my property that you're not realizing, and they start to explain it, people start talking in these extremes. Like, well, a house in Toronto is, you're like, oh, thanks. I didn't have my atlas. Is that where we are? A house in Toronto, it's not easy. And you're like, it's actually easy. There's 109 of them for sale in your area. You have to be honest. And seller agents are not standing up to the seller. And it might be fear of losing the listing. It might maybe be fear of not getting the listing, but they have become yes men. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here, guys, of just like the absolutely egregious actions of some of these listing agents. Here's a text message. This is a colleague of mine. And again, if you're young, you're negotiating over text message. Okay, don't do it. Be collegial. And I don't fault my colleague. He or she is a phenomenal agent. But in your early 20s, this is what you do. This is the listing agent has written back and said, $975,000 isn't going to do it. They might come down from $1,028,500. See if your buyers can get some family money donated to them. Also, I lend out second mortgages. I am happy to give them second mortgage as long as they have decent down payment. First of all, the conflict of interest that exists there is just unbelievable. That is a listing agent telling a seller agent, I will give a second mortgage to your clients to be able to overpay for this property, saying, go get money from your family. There's no empathy there. Let's work together. But that doesn't exist in this market. Here's another example from another colleague. Offers are being presented on a house that is listed for $1,199,000. There are 3 offers. My colleague who sent me this email has been told by the listing agent that he or she already has the highest offer. They have been invited to improve their offer, to which my colleague said, we are not improving. We are already paying a price that is well in line with market value. And then the listing agent says, hi, name, thank you for submitting the offer. Based on the current market, you might want to refer to the recent sold listings as below. And then 3 links to listings. Kindly improve your offer by 8:30 tonight if your clients wish to stay competitive in the market. The condescension. For context, guys, this agent put links to 3 sales from February of this year, January of this year, and November of 2024. So incorrect information. And you might say, hey, David, that agent's doing a great job negotiating for her seller clients. No. If you go back to the beginning of this conversation, it's about why are more deals not being consummated? The seller's expectations are out of line with the market. The listing agent is not educating the seller. The listing agent is not standing up to the seller. Listing agent is not doing his or her job. Ego, inexperience, and then this mess here, this condescension. You absolutely, positively cannot do this to a buyer agent. You are supposed to extend your hand, the proverbial olive branch, work together. You don't send them comps because that agent has feelings and emotions like anybody else out there. And people get emotional. That agent might get their back up. If this is passed along to the buyer, they might get their back up. And at the end of the day, this one completely fell apart. One more example, and this one is my own. This was, as I mentioned, a lowball offer that came in on a property last night. The agent says to me, hi, David, thank you for arranging the showing yesterday. I appreciate it. Hey, good start. But then we get, I wanted to let you know that we looked at more than 15 properties yesterday in many different areas. We decided to give your client a try before moving on to the next candidate. You could tell me that's honest. You could tell me, David, that's based on the market. You could say it's totally fair. But if that's how you're starting out as an agent, listen, I'm not going to say I don't have an ego. I mean, look at me. It's called The Last Honest Realtor. But what I mean is that I have the experience to say, I don't care. It's just words, right? It's what I tell my daughter. When your brother says something, okay, it's just words. But what if I pass this along to the client? And why would you ruffle feathers right off the start? Based on the homework we did and believe the other 3-bedroom house sold nearby has a strong comparable to your client's, please see the following link. So this guy basically did a CMA with a bunch of selected properties, and I could do my own. You can make numbers saying if you want. And then it says, since these properties sold price changed from $1,481,984 to $1,386,11, 6.8% down. Considering all above differences, my client offered reasonable price with finance and home inspection condition. They can close right before Christmas. Let's make a deal here. So there's a few things here. First of all, they can close right before Christmas. Now I spoke to the agent and I said, did you see the 2 kids' bedrooms? And he said, yes. And I said, you've offered us a closing of December 23rd. Now, again, you can say, David, I don't care. I'm out for blood. I don't care about you and your clients. You have to. That's how deals get done. You never called me to discuss any of the facets of this offer or this listing. You didn't ask me anything, right? Ask questions. What works for you? What works for your clients? You offer December 23rd closing. What are my clients going to do? They want to put up a Christmas tree. You know what they are going to do? They're going to take the listing down. If we don't sell by December 1st, they want to put a Christmas tree up in the living room. They want to have friends and family over. They want to enjoy. They'll sell it next year. You make an offer of the December 23rd closing date? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, to tell me right off the bat, you saw 15 properties. Okay, yeah, fine, you're negotiating. To tell me that you're going to, quote, give us a try before moving on to the next candidate, I mean, I could say maybe your heart's not in it. That, guys, that doesn't make any sense to me. And as I said, seller agents are guilty. Sellers are guilty. Buyer agents, they can be guilty of ego, inexperience, and then rudeness, pushing sellers away, not understanding the emotions of the seller, which is what I just explained. Now, the buyers are guilty of, okay, and I've put this to be fair, the least amount of guilt is on the buyers. Buyers, you're off the hook. Totally understand. But at the same time, some of the buyers want to sort of squeeze blood from a stone. We have this one client, and he emailed Chris the other day, and it kept saying things like, the sellers need to realize, the sellers need to understand. The property that this individual is interested in is discounted. It is well below market. And then you're saying the seller needs to understand, the seller needs to understand. You may be right, but this is a property that's in a very prominent area of Toronto where the market is not bad at all. And I might argue it's beyond balanced and it's into seller's market territory. So sometimes buyers, and don't get me wrong, if you're looking for an absolute steal, an absolute deal, go for it. Depending on the area, you want to go into York region right now, it might be there. But I have a saying. You're going to say, David, that sounds very salesy. It is better to overpay for a home you love than to underpay for a house you like. This is not a share of stock. This is something that you live in. And I have said it before. Actually, let me push this back a bit. My second condo. Oh my God, I'm old. My second condo. I remember I was in competition with one other person, and the agent said to me, I think you need to come up 15 grand and you'll get it. And this was like, for context, $660,000. I think I came up 10 grand and I got it. And then I called my dad and I told him, and he said, boy, was that stupid. Now you're going to think your dad thought it was stupid for you to go up 10 grand. My dad said, it was stupid to leave it to chance. What's the difference between 670 and 675? I lived there for 8 years. I proposed to my wife in that condo. I had my first child in that condo. And I don't want to tell you what I sold it for because it'd be very tacky, but I did very well. My dad was right. Why would I have left that to chance? And then guess what? I did it again when I bought my house. And the funny thing is, I've always said that a real estate agent should use another real estate agent when they transact because they need to take the emotion out of it. I've used a real estate agent for every transaction. Okay, when I sold my first condo, when I made the offer and bought my second condo, no, there's the example. Thank you, Dad. I made 4 offers in 2017. I had a colleague represent me every single time. I represented Chris, Tara, Matt. And then when I went to buy my house, The agent said to me, and they were much bigger numbers, if you come up 75,000, it's yours. And what did I do? I went up 50. And I got it, but I left it to chance. So I'm telling you that because I want to give context. I just said better to overpay for a house you love than to underpay for a house you like. And I want to tell you it's not always easy. The reason I gave you those two examples from my own experience is not to completely contradict my point, but to say it can be tough. And so when you go back to the buyers, I say now, if you're a first-time condo buyer and you can go and buy for $500,000 and that same model sold for $665 at the absolute peak, you've got to consider all the factors. And I know it's tough to jump in, and I know the media is negative, and maybe it does. Maybe it does drop to $490. But look at that upside and remember why you're buying it. Now, what can the four parties to the transaction do differently to get more deals done? So I used the example of this agent that emailed me last night, and I was talking to Matthew earlier, and I was saying, this agent could have called me in advance. So this agent, the funny thing is, when this agent called me and said he sent me an offer, I said, okay, I'm not in front of my computer. Can you tell me the price, the closing, the deposit, the conditions? And he said, well, the closing December 23rd, and it's conditional on financing and home inspection, and the deposit's 5%. I didn't hear the price. And I said to him, I noticed you left the price out. And he said, yeah, just take a look at the offer. I said, well, I'm on the phone. Just tell me what the price is. He said, just take a look at the offer. I'm happy to chat. I mean, you're off to a really bad start there, right? But this is what agents are doing. They're not communicating. This agent should have called me in advance. And then I'm using this as an example. If you're a buyer agent or you're a buyer, what can you do? Call them in advance. Don't spring it on them. And then ask them, hey, my client wants to offer something a little bit lower. Would you like to see it? Any agent's going to say yes. Yes. Get a yes out of them. Then when you bring them an offer, even if it is quite poor, you can say, listen, I called you. You said you wanted the offer. Agents aren't doing that. Buyer agents are just throwing it in there. They're not calling you in advance. Talk to them. Create rapport. Humanize the situation. Ask about the seller's kids. Ask how long they've lived there. How have they liked it? Talk about your strategy. Hey, my clients have a price, but do you want to see a starting offer? Do you feel like your clients will need to negotiate? How many times do you think they'll need to go back and forth? And some of you listening to this or watching this are saying, this is all fluff. No one cares. I'm out for blood. And you're different. You're going to put the dagger in and sink it. It's not that easy. This is strategic. Having these conversations, this isn't being weak. This is being smart. Talk to the agent about the market. Make small talk. Create that rapport. Ask them how their year is going. Ask them how the fall's going. Ask them what they're up to on the weekends. How many properties are they showing? How many buyers are they working with? Be collegial, be professional, and create that rapport. Find out what is important. And you do this by asking questions. Ask as many questions as you can. You ask somebody, what's the most important thing in this, let's say, other than price? They might just tell you, well, we really need a closing date. Why do you need that closing date? Well, my clients are expecting a child. Well, my clients have to sell a condo. Well, ask questions. The more you converse, the more information you're going to have, and the better chance that you're going to consummate this transaction. All four parties need to be in alignment in order to get a deal done, and all four parties to the transaction need to do a better job of getting out of their way. Why is nothing selling this fall? I think I've just outlined it. I think it's a lot on the sellers. It's a little bit on the buyers. It's definitely on the listing agents, but you know what? It's on the buyer agents too. This is a very different market from what we have been accustomed to, not just over the last, say, 2023 and 2024 post-peak on the downswing. It's a very different market from 2022, 2021, but it's even different from like 08, 09. And a lot of folks weren't in the market at that time. They have absolutely no experience. A lot of folks can't adapt. A lot of folks won't adapt. And many just really don't know how to. So moving forward in 2026, and I expect it to be a similar market, the question is, can we learn from our mistakes? Well, that's not rhetorical. We talk about this in my office and with my team every single day. We try to lead by example, both on the buy side and the sell side. It's about communication. It's about, as I have spoken to many times, humanizing, being professional, being collegial, and while it might sound kind of silly, hey, this is a people business. There are four parties to the transaction, and those folks absolutely have to work together to get things done. So folks, that is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed that look at why nothing is really moving in the fall market. Sales are low, listings are high, absorption rates low, competition is up there, and the four parties of the transaction are driving each other crazy. If you like this, please go ahead and leave me a comment on YouTube. If you have any questions, do the same. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I will see you here next time on The Last Honest Realtor.